and just share with us your name and where you're calling in from. And we'll be starting very, very soon. All right. Great. We have a couple, nearly 200 people on right now. Thank you all again for joining our webinar tonight. Today's webinar is focused on organizing against Israel bonds. U.S. investments in Israel bonds have funded decades of occupation, military aggression, land theft, and genocide against Palestinians. And we know that these are financial instruments that have effectively upheld a system of genocide and apartheid for decades, and it's our responsibility to disrupt it. Before I begin, also, I just want to shout out a win last night. Alameda County divested from Caterpillar. They initiated the process last night of divesting $32 million in public funds from Caterpillar, which is the world's largest manufacturer of construction equipment, which has long faced criticism for its role in the destruction of Palestinian homes, infrastructure, and agriculture, as well as its role in the U.S. prison industrial complex and border militarization and immigration detention centers. So this is a divestment win that follows months of advocacy and organizing led by the Bay Area Divest Coalition, and got endorsements from more than 80 organizations, businesses, and unions. So just want to offer a shout out there and encourage you all to check out the divestment win from just last night. Back to Israel bonds. This is why we have a webinar planned. This is the final webinar in our US CPR's divestment series. We are talking about Israel bonds, which are unrestricted loans from individuals and institutions that go directly to the Israeli government, including the military. And our speakers will break down more about what are Israel bonds, how do they work, and how do we organize against them. And just to say that, Israel bonds are war bonds. The sales of Israel bonds historically peak during Zionist military campaigns against Palestinians. And between October 2023 and March of 2024 alone, $8 billion was raised from Israel bonds. So it's really important for us to be having this conversation, to be learning from our speakers today who are engaging in active campaigns to divest from Israel bonds on an institutional, on a city level, on a state level. We're going to be learning specifically about two strategic campaigns today, one from Lydia, who's organizing in South Florida, and one from Shahinaz, who's organizing through the UAW Labor for Palestine's Divest from Israel Bonds campaign. So we're going to learn together, again, how do Israel bonds work? How do we develop campaign objectives and strategies to divest from Israel bonds, and what are the broader implications of doing so? So we're gonna basically do a panel with Lydia and Shahinaz, then we're gonna have time for Q&A, and then afterwards we're gonna close out with resources, both on the Israel bonds campaign organizing and just general resources from US CPR. So we really encourage you all to include your questions in the Q&A function. It's going to be hard for us to keep track of all the questions in the main chat. So if you do have questions, please put it in the Q&A function and we'll do our best to respond. We will be sending out a follow-up email with the materials and the resources and the links from this session. So if you don't capture them all, don't worry. And this webinar is being recorded, so you will have a chance to go back and watch it if you have to hop off or if you want to share with your networks and your friends. So again, we'll be sharing resources throughout, but we'll also send those out afterwards. And just a reminder that this is an anti-oppressive space, so any racism, Zionism, sexism, Islamophobia, any oppressive language in the chat will result in an automatic ejection from the event. Harassment will not be tolerated. And at the same time, we also really want to encourage folks to connect with each other, but just please be mindful of the size of the event. Try to use the chat to respond to prompts and to questions. And if you want to follow up with a specific participant, you can reply to them privately. And you can message us as the facilitators if you have any questions specifically for us. Otherwise, please message the Q&A chat. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna introduce our speakers. Lydia is a movement lawyer based in Miami, Florida, who is dedicated to utilizing the law and policy to support movements working towards dismantling colonialism and building the power of Indigenous communities, particularly those in the Global South. Um, Lydia received her BA from the University of Missouri and her JD from Harvard Law School. And her motivation for her work really comes from her family, who taught her that immense social change could be created by small groups of everyday people. And Lydia is going to speak more to her work on the Break the Bonds campaign in South Florida. Shahnaz is an Egyptian-American international human rights lawyer and social scientist whose work focuses on the MENA region and draws on her lived experiences as a member of the Arab diaspora. She's a member of the UAW Labor for Palestine, which is a member organization of the broader Labor for Palestine network, and of the Northeastern University Graduate Student Worker and Harvard University Adjunct Workers Locals of the UAW International Union. So thank you both for joining. Just before we get started, we just want to do a quick poll to gauge where everyone is at today. So please fill this out. We'll take just 30 seconds to fill it out. We want to get a sense of whether you're starting your own campaign, supporting existing campaigns, or if you're just here to learn, to just help us get a better sense of who's in the room and what questions we should be focusing on. Okay, so we're seeing a number of people who already have a campaign. Many people are trying to start one. Most people are here to learn. And we have a number of people who are also researching if there are Israel bonds in our community. This is really helpful. Thank you all for filling this out. Please take just a couple more, 30 more seconds to fill it out. We're just gauging what your interest in Israel bonds campaigning is. Yeah, it looks like the majority of folks are here to learn about how to organize against Israel bonds. Okay, I think we can close the poll. This is really helpful. So yeah, we have a good amount of people already have a campaign researching Israel bonds. Many people are here to learn, and some people who are also trying to actually start a campaign. So hopefully this session is helpful. Again, drop your questions throughout in the Q&A function. I'm going to go ahead and get started and ask Lydia to share with us, just to break down, what are Israel bonds? Over to you, Lydia.
Thank you, Celine, and thank you everyone for joining. I know you all are very busy, so I appreciate having your time and being here with you this evening. So Israel bonds, they function, like Celine said, as a loan to the Israel government. So when someone purchases these bonds, the money that whatever money they spent is sent straight to the Israeli government's budget, and then they can spend it in any way they wish. It's unrestricted funds. And so anyone can invest in these bonds. You all can, I could, individuals can, universities, city governments. And the financial reason why major institutions tend to invest in these bonds is because of how they function as a loan. So like any loan, they are paid back the money they've invested plus interest. And if we can show the slide, Celine, the first one that was added in the presentation. I don't know if it's okay. Yes, okay, so this image. So as you can see, there's, if you just go on the Israel Bonds website, there are a bunch of different bonds listed, and you'll see some of them are labeled as 2-year, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, and then you see the rate. And so this is how much interest they accrue. And so maturity date is the day that you get paid back what you invested plus interest. And so if you buy a 2-year bond and you buy it for $500, in 2 years, you're paid back $500 plus interest. And so that's why a lot of investors, for many other reasons, financially, they say, you can't penalize for this. This is simply an investment that, makes us money. So that's kind of the defense for universities and city governments that invest. And what this does is it creates a cycle of bonds within the Israeli government where they pay off one bond payment with another bond investment. And so that creates a really unstable economy. And there have been multiple reports from Bloomberg Finance saying that the Israeli economy is right now floating on a cycle of bonds. There's not much economic strength to their government right now outside of these bonds. So they're a really big financial pillar propping them up right now. And the Israel bonds program is really clear that this is a huge part of the Israeli economy, especially during times of conflict, like Celine said earlier. So if we go to the next slide, if you go on the Israel Bonds website, if you look at this very last FAQ question that is highlighted, it says, if Israel bonds did not exist, could Israel quickly create a similar capital raising operation in the US during a national emergency? A very short summary of their responses, if you just look at that last sentence, obviously the idea of Israel trying to withstand an economic and security crisis for 18 months is inconceivable. The answer to that question is basically no. If the program doesn't exist, it would be very difficult for the Israeli economy to sustain itself. And if you go to the next slide, you will see that, the color on it is a bit odd. If you look at this in person, and the link will be shared, this is a timeline on the Israel Bonds website. They have a virtual museum, and they highlight some of the instances where Israel Bonds has really helped the economy. So in addition to them showing how, Israel Bonds was used to build a major highway in Israel, which then takes pressure off their budget and allows them to spend more on defense, they have also used it. They highlight how in the Six-Day War, they raised $200 million through a war campaign. And if you go to the next slide, and the final slide for me, you can see that that's how they're pitching the bonds right now, as war bonds, and they call this their Invest in Life campaign, and are really predicating your investment in bonds as something that's helping them throughout the genocide. And what's particularly concerning is that, you can donate, you can buy bonds in any government, like US bonds are a very popular investment, but normally it's public. But Israel has privatized this through the Israel Development Corporation. So it's really hard to see like who's invested what. And Leah will drop in the chat a submission that we just sent to the UN on why the privatization of this is really dangerous. But I will turn it to Shahnaz to explain more about that and some other key facts about what are Israel bonds.
Yeah, thank you, Lydia. Yeah, Shahanaz, if you can explain more about privatization, plus also like who owns the Israel bonds and how do we find a target that holds Israel bonds in our city?
Yes, absolutely. And if you could go to the slide where we have our UAW Labor for Palestine FAQ, the other one. Yeah. Okay, so we made because we are having a ongoing, it's been a really long time to try and convince the UAW International Executive Board, which is the governing elected body that runs the UAW labor union, to divest somewhere around, the number fluctuates, they make a lot of different claims, but we estimate somewhere around $1 million currently from Israel bonds. And so this link is going to get shared around with you later, but just wanted to like flag that this has like a really basic breakdown of some of the questions that we're seeing of like, what is a government bond? Just like basically, what is an Israel bond? All of these things. So we'll just leave that there so that you all can see that. In the meantime, I'm going to talk more about what it is like in terms of who owns Israel bonds, and then how do you find targets that actually own these Israel bonds, and then what are you going to do about it once you do. So the big thing around like who owns Israel bonds, why would you invest in Israel bonds? I think the very first thing that I want to like start by mentioning is that a lot of financial institutions and people who just engage in financial investment culture, there is a very sort of culture of financial investment and the financial world that divorces what an investment is from its actual reality on the ground, what the consequence of your investment is. So people often talk about, a government bond in this kind of vague term when they advertise to you that you should invest in government bonds. A lot of funds that I know people are asking about 401ks in this chat, a lot of 401ks are invested in government bonds of all kinds, including Israel bonds. And why is that? The reason for this is because government bonds are broadly considered to be very stable. They are a good way if you are someone who thinks about investment in this very kind of divorced from reality way of making sure that there's some sort of stability in your financial portfolio. So people like to diversify their portfolio, is the term that they use, by having a mix of stocks, which are seen as more aggressive. They can fluctuate much more wildly. And so you can make a lot of money, but you also might lose a lot of money on stocks and bonds, which are seen as much more stable. Government bonds are tied to the government that you are investing in. You are loaning them this money. You are collecting interest when they pay back the loan after the date of maturity, as Lydia mentioned. And there are institutions, a lot of you might have seen going around this information about how Moody's, which is a major financial investing kind of institution and tracker of these kind of bonds and which bonds are strong, which bonds aren't, saying that Israel's ranking with Moody's has tanked. So what that means is there's these institutions that track which bonds are stable, which ones aren't. They give people financial advice about how to invest different funds. And they give a rating, like a grade, to each country that has government bonds, including Israel. And they say, this country is very likely to pay you back. Their economy is strong. So this is a good investment. And what we've seen over time is that during the past year, especially as the kind of situation around the public consciousness of what the actual reality on the ground of these bonds is has come to light, that people have kind of started to divest from Israel, that there have been boycotts, etc., and that their economy is tanking and their Moody's ranking has gone down. But I think what we really want to talk about is that this shouldn't just be about, someone gets a grade and you see that the bond is stable and therefore you invest in them. That's the logic that a lot of people who are investing in Israel bonds are using, like institutions, like corporations, individuals, companies that offer, 401k accounts and like 401k matches and the like, state pension funds, labor unions have all used this logic for decades at this point of this is a good investment because Israel has a high grade. They'll probably pay this money back without thinking about what are you actually doing when you invest in something that is a no strings attached loan for the Israeli government. What are you doing to people on the ground? And then I'd also want to add that in terms of who kind of invests in these, one of the things that was really common is that Israel after 1948 started advertising these Israeli bonds in a lot of Jewish communities and saying like, it would be a really good present to give to like someone in your family for like, a bat mitzvah present or something, that to have an Israel bond, like you're setting them up for financial success. So there's a lot of individuals that have these. And then also labor unions got kind of pulled into it. And this is where like groups like Labor for Palestine and UAW Labor for Palestine come into the fold because they had historic ties to institutions like the Histadrut, which is the national union in Israel, and to labor Zionists, people who view themselves as pro-labor, but also view themselves as Zionists, who connected with labor unions in the US and said, like, you should support us. Israel is a ostensibly socialist project. It is a leftist project because we have, some sort of social welfare in this growing country. And so you want that in the US, we should be on the same side. And trying to divorce that relationship between labor unions and Israel is taking a really long time. And you might encounter that if you do a bond campaign, a divestment campaign, that there's this hesitation.
That was super clear. Thank you so much, Shahnaz and Lydia, for explaining how Israel bonds work and how to understand them. My next question for you guys is, can you tell us about your campaigns in more detail? Like, what are their goals? And also, how can people plug in and support? We're already seeing a few questions in the chat. So maybe we can start with you, Lydia, and then go to Shahnaz.
Sure. So our campaign is housed in a new nonprofit that actually grew out of our campaign. So the campaign came first, called the Internationalist Law Center. And the Internationalist Law Center is a new nonprofit that's using litigation and policy advocacy to create accountability for illegal government investments that defund and displace communities in the US South, while also facilitating human rights violations in the global South. And our main campaign right now is this National Break the Bonds campaign, where we organize various grassroots campaigns across the country to target Israel bonds. And we also provide support and guidance to campaigns that we haven't organized ourselves and who have organically organized their own campaign independent of us, just to give them the information and resources we already have. And we also talk to individuals and groups who are considering taking on a campaign to help them with research or give them research questions that are helpful to figure out if they should start a campaign. So while we plan to launch more campaigns in the near future, our only active grassroots campaign right now in this bigger national Break the Bonds campaign is the Break the Bonds South Florida campaign. And what this campaign has done, it has filed litigation against the comptroller of Palm Beach County. And a comptroller is like an accountant of the county. He has invested $700 million of taxpayers' property taxes into Israel bonds. And we're suing on the basis of several Florida state statutes that regulate how taxpayer money can be spent. And what's interesting about the statutes we've used is that a version of them exists in almost every state. So happy to talk offline with anyone who's interested or more about those specific statutes we used. And so our ultimate goal of the litigation is that when the bonds mature and they return back to Palm Beach County's bank account, because remember, these are a loan and they come back with interest. So he's invested $700 million. It's going to come back to the Palm Beach County bank account in 3 years as $785 million. We're saying you invested that in violation of taxpayers' rights and violation of just your constituents' rights. And so when that money comes back, it should be placed in a public trust where local constituents get to vote on what these funds are spent on. For example, this $700 million was invested at a time where Palm Beach County had a $732 million budget shortfall, budget deficit that resulted in housing projects getting canceled, infrastructure projects getting canceled. So, there's many local needs that need to be invested, and we want to bring this money back to the constituents. And we also hope to get a result that makes it more difficult for bonds to be invested in if they're contributing to human rights violations. And we see this as building precedent that can eventually grow and be a bit more effective in just stopping investments in Israel bonds altogether. So we see this campaign as like a foundation in terms of setting precedent that we hope grows. And that's why we wanted to start an organization to keep growing this. We see it as being really long-term. And so ways to plug in. So the Break the Bonds South Florida campaign has a bunch of committees. It takes a powerhouse team to make this work. And speaking of, I just saw one of those powerhouse members pop up in the chat. So many of them are here. We could not function without our team. We have many campaigns. We have a community organizing campaign. We have a finance team campaign that helps crunch our numbers, a legal team, a press team. We have a group of attorneys who mentor us. So if you're interested in just getting onboarded onto the campaign and helping plug in to what we're already doing, a jot form will be shared in the chat, and you can sign up there, and someone from our community organizing team will reach out to you after our winter break. I'll be talking about like sustainability later on, so it's a huge part. We're taking a break. They'll reach out to you in January. But also fill out the form if you are interested in starting your own campaign or learning if you should, start your own campaign. And you can note on the form, like whether you're interested in joining or in starting your own thing. And we'll reach out too, because we also have a standing monthly meeting where people who are running their own grassroots campaigns or thinking of starting one join once a month to come together and strategize. And we also host that space. So we can onboard you to that or just have like a one-off conversation with you. And then another great way is to plug in and support is to donate to the Internationalist Law Center. We're a new org, and so we're low on funds and could use all that we can get. And so a donation link will be dropped where you can note if you want to be a one-time donor or a monthly donor, but we'd appreciate anything you could spare. And I will pass it to Shahnaz.
Thanks so much, Lydia. And yeah, I really just want to plug the Internationalist Law Center. Lydia has already, supported our own campaign so much, and you can always learn from fellow organizers, I think, more than you can in isolation, just kind of spinning your wheels, wondering what to do. So definitely do reach out and use that resource. And I'm going to be talking about UAW Labor for Palestine and the Labor for Palestine Network, which are also resources that you can reach out to. So let me talk a little bit first about who we are kind of broadly and how you can plug in, and then what it is that we do and some strategies that we've used to plug in more people to build our capacity. Okay, first things first. So as Celine mentioned at the start of this talk, I am a UAW member. I've been part previously and am part of two incredible local campaigns. And so if you are in the UAW or another labor union, your union might already have a Labor for Palestine formation like ours. And this is kind of a great way, one of many ways, to get involved in national organizing in your union that I would really recommend, like building strength and building the broader reform movement in the labor movement world is really important right now as we face all kinds of repression, including Zionist repression. So please definitely, if you don't have a union, maybe look into starting one. If you do have a union, find out if they have a Labor for Palestine. There will be a link that goes around later that has our list of existing Labor for Palestine chapters, and then also a form that you can fill out if your group wants to join Labor for Palestine. It is primarily labor unions that are involved, but there's other formations of workers that aren't yet unionized who are also in there. We have, I think it's been very popular all over social media that a lot of tech workers are opposing their companies' complicity in the genocide, and a lot of tech workers are not yet unionized. And we have a lot of those campaigns that are members of Labor for Palestine. So you can definitely look at that. There's also an onboarding form specific to UAW if you're a UAW member and want to get involved. That's going to be going around and will be sent to you by email. So UAW Labor for Palestine, again, it's part of this national organizing and kind of reform movement push within the UAW. And we have a couple of different campaigns and goals that we see as really important. Firstly, we see the PGFTU, which is the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions, the calls that they have put out over the past year, multiple calls calling on the labor movement and workers all over the world to support Palestine and to stand in solidarity with them. We see what they are doing and what they're calling for as not crossing a picket line. When you support Israel, you cross the Palestinian workers' picket line. And so that is the language we've really used to mobilize a lot of people in the labor union movement. And so that is what we're doing. We're trying to follow the best that we can, the guidance of Palestinian workers, especially the PGFTU, to support them in this time where they're facing a genocide. In that vein, we essentially have two main kind of campaign branches. The first one is our divestment campaigns, which is really what I'm talking to you about primarily today. We started from the top and we looked down, like who has the most money invested in Israel in our union, in Israel bonds specifically, and what can we do about it? So we looked at the International Executive Board, our leaders, and this $1 million+ that they have had invested in Israel, that generation after generation of reformist union organizers starting in 1973, when Arab and Black workers in Detroit went on wildcat strike, saying that they didn't want their union dues to be invested in bonds that were helping Israel kill family members back home. We have taken on that fight again and again, decade after decade, saying, UAW, you have to divest these millions of dollars from Israel. We have been calling on it for so long. So that's kind of our main campaign, but there are other places within the union in which there might be Israel bonds that we're looking at and that we're helping people campaign to get rid of. One campaign that is kicking off is to divest state pensions in Michigan, which we found also have Israel bonds in them. And that's not only UAW workers, but there's a lot of UAW workers that are under Michigan state pension system. And that has, I want to say at least $10 million invested in Israel bonds that we're looking at. So state pensions are another area. And then For workers who have 401ks or whose union local has some sort of investment fund that supports the local's kind of operating costs and like grows the wealth of the local, that might be another place in which, again, your dues money that you're paying to your union is being invested in Israel. So there's all these levels from top to bottom where you can really look at your union, UAW and others, and see where you can divest. So that's a kind of comprehensive campaign, and we are always, if you are a local who is, just starting a fund for your local and you want to know how to make sure that you don't invest in Israel bonds or in Israel, then you can talk to us. If you are a local who's trying to figure out how to divest, you can talk to us. Like, we are here to support you. For every local in the entire union, like, we will support you in doing these divestment campaigns. And then the other thing that we're looking at is a just transition in the long term. We're trying to figure out, how do we stop as a union, especially a union that is, that has a huge membership that makes weapons, and move away from the weapons industry? How do we make sure that these workers still have good jobs and that their livelihoods aren't threatened, but that their livelihoods are not tied to killing other workers abroad? So that's our other campaign, and finding, unique ways, whether that's a people's arms embargo, wildcat strikes, etc., to really like drive home the message. We need to figure out another sort of way that this industry can go in this country. And then Labor for Palestine is the broader formation that other groups who are doing the exact same thing and are workers in different industry are part of. And so if you're not UAW and you're doing, some other type of worker organizing, you can join Labor for Palestine, and we're doing the exact same thing and offering the exact same supports across the US and Canada now. And then last thing, we're not a nonprofit, we're just a group of workers in our union, so we don't have any sort of fund that you can donate to, but a lot of workers over the past year, and more are, rising, have gone on strike or are on strike right now, specifically, protesting retaliation, protesting the way in which they have been, prevented from exercising their professional freedom of speech in the workplace and outside of the workplace, been, facing retaliatory firings for supporting Palestine. And that is central to keeping this work alive in the labor movement. So right now, UAW temp staff, USU, are on strike. They have a hardship fund you can donate to. There are other unions that are on strike who have done so much to support Palestine, and you can donate directly to those rank and file workers so that you can help keep us going strong in the face of what has been a really unfortunate amount of repression from both our union leaders and, Zionists and the US government at large. Thank you all.
Thank you both. Seeing a lot of really good questions in the chat. Hopefully we'll get more, like, some time for Q&A at the end. But I want to ask you both, can you tell us a little bit more about how and why you chose the targets that you did? And this is just to kind of give people a sense of, if they're interested in starting their own campaign, what should they be looking for? And maybe this time we can start with you, Shahinaz, and then go to Lydia.
Yes, appreciate all of the union love in the chat. We really, really appreciate it. Okay, yeah, if you're interested in starting your own campaign, how do we do that? What I kind of mentioned at the very beginning is that really, because the Israel bonds, you can buy them through a private corporation, there's this kind of idea in the financial space that they're a stable bond, that they make your any kind of investment portfolio that you have more stable in the long run, and anyone can buy them. Everyone has connections to Israel bonds in some way. So I loved seeing the questions that people had in the chat about, like, how do I divest my own investments? Look at your investments. If your company offers a 401k, if you're a worker that is attached to some sort of pension fund, look at, ask your family members to do the same, your communities. Like, for me, the way that I got involved in Labor for Palestine is I looked at the way that, what connections do I have as a person in my community? I am a university student, PhD student. I'm also a university adjunct faculty. Both of those places were unionized with UAW, and UAW had these investments. So for me, I looked at I've also supported a lot on the university divestment campaigns as well. It was my universities and my union that I really wanted to do this kind of organizing work on. And we looked for the investments. You really have to dig for them because, sometimes they're hidden, but there are some resources like Little Sis that has a slightly couple months now outdated guide that will also be shared on like which places hold these kind of investments, but really start to do your research and find them. And unfortunately, you will probably find them and then do those sorts of campaigns. Your city, there's like wonderful kind of city, greater Boston formations. I live in the Boston area, so a lot of formations for like the different neighborhoods that are asking their city councils, or like the cities and towns in the broader greater Boston area that are asking those towns to divest, your county, your state. Just yeah, like really look at like what ties you have to different communities and where they might be investing in Israel bonds, and start having those conversations with them about how do we divest. And also just wanted to point out, because I think somebody did point it out and Lydia already mentioned it, but you don't really divest in terms of like just dumping the investment because it does have a maturity date. But what you're really trying to do is you're trying to make sure that this cycle of letting the bond come to maturity, then reinvesting, then letting the bond come to maturity and reinvesting doesn't continue. So you want a commitment when you're organizing from whatever group you're organizing against or with to we're not going to reinvest once this bond hits maturity in Israel anymore. And I believe that I've covered all of your question, but let me know if I haven't.
No, that was perfect. I'll pass it to you, Lydia, to answer the same question.
Yeah, I mean, Shahan has covered a lot of it, so I'll just add that how you choose to answer this question will be like different than like how we did. When it comes to choosing your target, it really depends on what's your organizing group's capacity and what are your skills. And so for us, before we had filed our lawsuit, we had a group of like 10 or 15 people who were already, interested in helping us build out this campaign. And two of us were lawyers. So we kind of had that natural like skill. Like we didn't have to go find an attorney. So not saying that should be a block to anyone if you don't have an attorney in our group, but that was part of our calculus as to why this tactic was so a lot easier and accessible to us. Not easier, but more accessible. And the facts are so egregious in Florida, like the world's largest investor, that we thought this could be a really powerful way to create precedent because these facts are just so crazy. $700 million of taxpayers' property taxes. You can't even refuse to pay that or else your home gets seized. So we thought, because of the precedent, because of how wild the facts are, and because Florida is so conservative and you usually need a multi-tactic campaign to be successful. And by that, I mean like policy, litigation, and community organizing all happening simultaneously to kind of make a push. We had decided on litigation, and we also decided on it because, as a movement lawyer, you don't see your end goal of litigation being like you get the ruling that you want. Like obviously that's ideal, but there's so many other ways litigation is powerful, such as in creating narrative, through certain parts of the lawsuit process. You can get information through discovery. It helps make the community feel really excited, which then helps you build your base, and then you have more power. And so we just saw a lot of opportunity there. But like Shahna said, there are so many ways and so many targets that you can choose. One campaign that would be so helpful, as all of your questions are showing, or just in each locality, if everyone had a research-based campaign where you send public records to your city government and to universities and just see who is in my city limits invested in these. And for corporations, you would have to, get in touch with employees and see if they can figure it out, check your pension funds through websites, things like that. But there's just a bajillion different targets. And so I think when it came to assessing our skills and capacity within our South Florida group, litigation felt right in the context and location that we were in, but also with what skills we had. But you can make a target. There's many, many targets here, unfortunately. And so I think it all goes back to that question of what are my skills and what are my capacity.
Thank you both so much. And then just quickly, like what kind of skills do you all feel like are useful for people who do want to challenge Israel bonds? And what are some ways that you all have been able to engage volunteers in your campaign? We'll start with Lydia this time and then go to Shahinaz.
Yeah, again, because of the tactics that we picked, policy analysis is super helpful. It can be very dense, and so just knowing how to read through it is good. Same with reading through legal precedent. We also have a press team, so folks who know comms and media relations really well has been super helpful. To manage a campaign this, like big and ambitious and long term, you also need capacity. So project management skills are really important. We have an incredible finance team, which I always call like the beating heart of our campaign. That knowledge has been so essential for us just to really understand the numbers. And so that's really helpful. And then, we always want our volunteers to feel like they are an important part of the team. And so we always want to give them like a stake in what we're doing and an active role. So one major way is just like our community organizing team, they do onboarding calls. And so every week they have to reach out and set up a one-on-one with someone who's interested in our campaign, people who've signed up on the job form like you all just have. And so we have about like 8 people doing that, but that means about every week, 8 more people are getting added to our campaign, and then we grow and we grow and we grow. And so that's been a really helpful way to loop people in. And we kind of mimic that within each of our subcommittees. Like we have a finance one, we have a community organizing one. So we try to give everyone a really active like research role or outreach role that helps grow our capacity and help us reach our strategic goals.
Perfect. Thanks, Lydia. Shahinaz, if you want to add anything.
Yes, I mean, I think Lydia's already done a great job talking about some of the skills that you would need, like law, policy kind of experience, financial experience, definitely comms, strategy, project management. What I really wanted to talk about was this element that she touched on at the end of how you kind of mobilize like volunteers, because a lot of this can seem like really overwhelming. Like, I don't have a law degree, or I don't have policy experience or finance experience. I didn't even know what a bond was until you guys just started talking about it. That seems really overwhelming. But one of the things that as a labor movement organizer, I find to be really powerful and important about the labor movement is that we often focus on this idea of solidarity and what communities we're in solidarity with. So we often connect to a lot of different other community orgs and have like really deep ties to groups that are kind of operating in the same space as us, maybe in different ways, or are related to the work that we're doing in some sort of way. So an example that, like from my personal experience, is that I am a labor movement organizer, but I'm also in higher education. And in higher education, you have like your undergrad students, and then they have community ties, like they live in the community and they might be like volunteering at a food bank or some other sort of like community group. And oftentimes like those groups are willing to lend capacity that is really, really needed to do the actual kind of legwork that it takes to win these campaigns. Like, yeah, you have to strategize it, you have to dream it, you have to figure out what it is going to take to actually divest this money, but then you have to have a lot of people making a lot of phone calls, sending a lot of text messages, sending a lot of emails, both to the people that you want to support your campaign, but also to the people that you want to, who are the decision makers, who you want to pressure to make this decision, showing up outside of places and protesting and picketing and doing all of these things. Or like, even for instance, like we needed to collect a lot of information, and we had, it's not really glamorous work, but spreadsheet after spreadsheet that we needed to fill out to figure out like where this money was, and what the IEB was divesting, and who would be movable on whether or not they would vote yes to divest. And we had a lot of support from our community members that were willing to just, spend a couple of hours and fill out a spreadsheet with me. And so really mobilizing that kind of support, and also giving back when those groups have similar kinds of asks for you for their work, is, I think, especially critical right now when we are heading into a period with Trump being in power again, where we're going to have to be in solidarity with each other. We're going to have to support everybody's campaigns and the entire movement very strongly.
Okay, that's a perfect segue actually into the next question, which is, what strategies for you all have proven most effective actually in countering opposition from pro-Israel lobbyists or institutions actually that like are hesitant to divest? We can start with you, Lydia, and then go to Shahnaz, and then we just have one more question, and then we'll get to the Q&A.
Yeah, for us, it's just been focusing on the facts, and we are strategically really picking like a really finance-based argument that doesn't go too much into the morals of it, even though that's just, it's so valid, but we're unfortunately like operating within, a courthouse. So we're focusing on the facts and the finances of it. It's genuinely a bad investment. Like Shahana said, like it's been downgraded by Moody's. A report was, or a letter was just signed by 130 Israeli economists this week saying like our economy will tank, like we will not recover if we keep moving at this pace. If you look at the investments, they don't even beat the US rate of inflation. So you're losing out on your investment because inflation like eats up basically like the return you're making on it. So we have just focused on the facts, and that alone is pretty convincing. And also the fact that in a lot of these, I mean, in pretty much almost all of these localities that have invested, and they violated state statutes to do so. So focusing on the facts is what we've done. And I can pass it to you, Shahnaz.
Yeah, so in addition to that, the facts are really like what you're going to need, kind of like your top level organizer leaders who are, potentially going to get meetings with some of these decision makers at some point in your campaign to have on hand. One of the other places where community can be really impactful, though, is on like the emotional, moral, ethical arguments. We had that, or we were planning on sharing with you the Visualizing Palestine graphic that was really wonderful that came out over this past week that really demonstrates that. It shows like a woman in Palestine and then her family member back home whose money is being invested to help bomb her family member in Palestine. Yeah, thank you, Celine, for pulling that up. Being able to call whoever the decision makers are as a community member, as say maybe a rank and file union member, and say like my tax money, my dues money, my whatever it is that is being used to fund this investment is killing people that I know, people that I love, people that I'm in community with. That when it comes from, I think, like your organizer leaders, so to speak, it often kind of rings hollow for them because they're like, you're one person. When 100 people or 1,000 people are calling and they're telling them that same story, that does actually have a really, positive effect on whether or not they're swayed by the moral and ethical arguments.
Perfect. Thank you both. And final question from me before we get into everyone else's questions is just briefly, are there any lessons that you all would like to share that you've learned from your campaigns that other organizers can apply to their own Israel bonds divestment efforts? And maybe we can actually start with you, Shahnaz, this time, and then close out with Lydia.
Yeah, for me, the biggest lesson that I've learned is that we need to be sustained. I know that the past year has just felt like emergency after emergency, fire after fire. And it's unfortunately probably going to continue to feel like that. But we need to find ways that we can sustain each other and continue to hold steadfast in this struggle for Palestinian liberation and for liberation in general. Part of that is making sure that your org structure is conducive to that, like taking a break, like Lydia's org is doing. My org is also going to do that in a little bit. Trying to just find ways to weather any possible like opposition and really thinking that through. And I really do believe that one of the ways that we weather the long-term struggle against fascism is reviving the worker movement, for instance. So finding, the spaces that need to be revived, that need to get stronger so that we can weather this, and really contributing to them is so important.
Yeah, not too much to add on that. I just can't stress enough that this is a long-term struggle. And I think sometimes when we see really awful things happening, we want something really big to happen really fast. And that should be happening too, but also there's things that take a really long time, and we're planting seeds that will grow years and generations from now. And a lot of these things are unfortunately going to be longer versus, quicker. And so this is long term. And so you need the capacity, you need to build out your capacity for that. You need to have an org structure that aligns with that. And you need to have a mentality and a deep solidarity with those that we're helping to foster that. And so just, yeah, really keeping that long-term struggle in mind. Like for us, I think we're lucky if we get what we want in the next, 6 years. Hopefully it happens faster than that, but we're thinking very, very long term.
Yeah, I think these are lessons that would apply to any campaign for Palestine. This is a long struggle, and it requires us to like be able to sustain, both our organizations and our campaigns for long periods of time. And I think like what Lydia and Shahnaz have spoken to here, is really helpful for us, not just in terms of understanding how to go after Israel bonds, but also how to like engage people, bring people in, build up our organizations to be able to sustain our campaigns in the long term. So I just have a couple questions from the audience I'm going to ask you all. And the first one is, maybe I'll just pose like two and then you all can decide how to answer them. But one is, how do I identify if my 401k is invested in Israel bonds, and what steps can I take to make sure my money isn't being invested into them? And there's another question around like, how do we figure out if our unions are invested in Israel bonds? And there's specifically like, is the SEIU invested in Israel bonds? Do we know that?
Yeah, I can quickly answer the SEIU one. I was actually typing a response to that. Okay, SEIU has ties to Israel. Yes, it definitely does. And they have a Labor for Palestine chapter. I don't know specifically if they are invested in Israel bonds or if the Charlotte, North Carolina locals are invested in Israel bonds, but I know that the Purple Up for Palestine chapter of Labor for Palestine has been working very diligently over the past year to try and organize. So you can definitely, I know for sure you can reach them on Instagram and a few other social media sites and try to connect with them. In general, how do I know which unions to try to organize, particularly for blue collar and industrial work? So a huge part of this that I think maybe we like kind of touched on but didn't get into the weeds about is that you're going to need to power map. You're going to need to do a lot of research to figure out like which industries are involved, who employs them, what are their unions, things like that. Do they have bonds? And so if you're doing union organizing, I mean, Labor for Palestine is a great resource because we already have so many of the active unions that are involved in this work as part of our chapter. So you can look, we have a list of members, you can reach out to them, etc. But you can also look in your local community, like which organizations, like which employers have ties to Israel, and then which union represents those workers, if at all, or other worker formation, and then reach out to those people.
Thanks, Shahanaz. And just to add to the question about 401ks, there's an additional question around, in addition, how to identify if my 401k is invested in Israel bonds. What does the language exactly look like? Does it straight up say Israel bonds, or is it more sneaky than that? I don't know if either of you want to take that one.
I can talk a little bit about 401ks too, since we've done some research into that for our workers. So, in terms of if your specific 401k is invested in Israel bonds, so as someone who is like the owner of the 401k, you do have the right to reach out with a request for information from your whichever financial institution houses your 401k and find out exactly what your 401k is invested in. It can be a little bit tricky to find out exactly what it is invested in because sometimes like you will have I know a lot of people mention Vanguard. Vanguard is particularly sneaky about this because they'll say like Vanguard bonds and then they'll say Vanguard stocks and then they won't give you other information. You have to actually reach out to them to find out what like that means. But it's definitely been identified by a lot of people as a fund that potentially could be investing in Israel bonds. And one suggestion has been to look into ESGs, which are economic and socially sustainable investments. And those have kind of like minimum requirements that the websites who kind of certify something as an ESG investment will get into about like what requirements a country or a company has to meet in order for that investment to be considered an ESG investment. So that's where I would start looking for if you wanted to divest your own personal funds.
Thank you. And just because we're running out of time, just Lydia, I want to pass it to you. There's a question also for you about, will the language of the South Florida lawsuit be made available? And then also if you want to add anything to the other question.
Yeah. Okay. So for the other question, really quick, for pension funds, I'm just going to drop this resource here. State treasurers invest those a lot. And so CCR, Center for Constitutional Rights, has a really good template on how to write a public records request. So you can send one to your state treasurer and ask them what they invest in if you can't find it easily online, which you probably won't. And then the language of the lawsuit, that's a great question. So it is publicly available if you Google it, but sometimes that's hard to find. Like you have to know the case number. So we'll add it to our site. If you go to the internationalistlawcenter.org, there's a press tab, and we'll add the lawsuit there in the next week or two, so you can see it. But if you Google it, it might come up.
Thank you both so much. Let's give a round of appreciations, applause to Shahnaz and Lydia for breaking down really clearly how this campaigning actually works, and what it takes to organize to break Israel bonds, to divest from Israel bonds. Just real quick, we'll try to cover this in the last 3 minutes. If Kat, you can pull up the slides for the resources. Just want to remind you all to really check out the Visualizing Palestine resource. It's actually one of our other USCPR fellows, Noel, who spoke, I think, on a previous webinar for us. Ohio organizers are working to pressure their municipality to stop using millions in public funds to buy Israel bonds. And this is like a visual explainer of Israel bonds, and it kind of uses Ohio as a case example. And it kind of explains how and visualizes how Israel bonds sustain colonialism and genocide, and how you can campaign around against it. And just to repeat some of the ways that you all can take action and plug into the campaigns Lydia and Shahnaz are leading. Again, if you're running a campaign, you can join the Break Israel Bonds National Network by filling out the JOT form. Again, we'll send all the links in the email. And also for people who want to support this work, you can fund the Reform Caucus of UAW and donate to Israel Bonds National Network. And also, again, like you can, for groups of workers in the US or Canada, you can have your group join the Labor for Palestine National Network. And for UAW members, you can join as a UAW Labor for Palestine member. And then we just have a couple of other USCPR resources that we typically like to share to close out some of these webinars. We have a city council organizing toolkit that includes like resources on general like divestment organizing for cities. We have, if you're interested in plugging into any of our strategy groups, we have strategy groups on city council organizing and corporate pressure. You can fill out our form. I think it's on the next slide to sign up for strategy and skills resources. You can sign up for our GAIN network where we will follow up with you if you fill this out. Again, we'll send out these links. And we also have a People's Arms Embargo Corporate Pressure Toolkit that we newly released that focuses on organizing to put pressure on corporations to meet demands of the movement, specifically around arms embargo. And I think on the next slide, if we can go to the next slide, we do have our updated USCPR Stop Gaza Genocide Toolkit that has a lot of materials for local boycott, campaigning efforts, flyers, and general materials that we upload on our website, including the and military funding map. And then finally, the Drop the ADL from Schools resource, which was launched in October as part of the expansion kind of the Drop the ADL efforts. So if you're an educator, if you're a student, really encourage you to check this out, and hopefully it's useful in your school district. And yeah, so we're right on time closing out. Thank you all so much for joining. We will be sharing the links, the ways to plug in the follow-up email. And thank you again to Shahnaz and Lydia, who are really amazing USCPR fellows, and far beyond that, just organizing really incredible campaigns. So appreciate you both for joining and speaking to everyone today. And yeah, if you all have any questions, feel free to reach out to USCPR anytime, and hope to see more campaigns like these emerging in other cities. And hopefully this helps you to plan your own or support existing campaigns in your area. Thank you all so much, and we'll close out here and see you all on the next one.